A young mother out celebrating New Year's never makes it home. Her life is stolen in a brutal attack, leaving a trail of mystery that would haunt investigators for 35 years, until an unexpected breakthrough finally revealed her killer. This is the chilling case of Tanya McKinley. Welcome back to Chilling Fireside Stories, where we delve into the haunting and heartbreaking cases that demand to be remembered. Before we begin, please be aware that this story contains sensitive content, including violence and references to sexual assault, that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. Grab your blanket, settle by the fire, and join me as we delve into the tragic story of Tanya McKinley, a vibrant young woman whose life was tragically cut short in 1985. Tanya McKinley was born on January 25, 1961, in the small town of Milton, Florida. Raised in a loving family, she had a close bond with her older sister, enjoying activities like playing outside, skateboarding, and bowling. After high school, Tanya moved to Pensacola, roughly 25 miles from her hometown, to pursue a career in the medical field. She aimed to become a medical transcriptionist, a profession requiring special courses but no medical degree. Her cousin Vanita moved with her, and they shared an apartment to save on rent. Shortly after moving, Tanya met a man named Tim and they began dating. Eventually, they moved in together, and in 1983, their son Timothy was born. While Tanya was thrilled to become a mother, her relationship with Tim was chaotic, leading them to part ways about a year after their son's birth. By the end of 1984, Tanya temporarily moved in with her cousin, who was now married with 2 children, planning to find her own place as soon as possible. On December 31st, Tanya, along with Vanita and her husband, decided to celebrate New Year's Eve at a local bar, leaving their children at a late-night daycare. They had a lively evening full of laughter and dancing. Tanya saw many familiar faces at the bar. As midnight struck, they welcomed the new year of 1985. Vanita and her husband prepared to head home, needing to pick up their children from the daycare, which was closing at 1 a.m. Tanya, however, wanted to stay at the bar a bit longer, as this was her only chance to unwind and relax after 2 years focused on work and caring for her son. Tanya asked Vanita to pick up her son from the daycare too, and Vanita agreed. Before parting ways, Vanita asked Tanya how she planned to get home, considering they had arrived together by car. Tanya assured her she would find someone familiar at the bar to give her a ride. On the morning of January 1st, Vanita woke up and realized that Tanya had not returned yet. Initially, she wasn't overly concerned, thinking Tanya might have stayed with a friend. However, her worries escalated when her mother-in-law knocked on the door with shocking news. Tanya had been found dead. Around 3 a.m. that night, a Pensacola resident and her daughter were heading to a vet clinic due to an urgent health issue with their dog. The daughter noticed something strange by the roadside, thinking it was a mannequin, but upon closer inspection, they realized it was a human body. They immediately called the police. Officers arrived and found the body of a young woman in an empty lot near the road. Her tights were pulled down, her dress lifted, and her shoes were missing. Next to her, they found a blue towel with red stains resembling blood. The deceased was identified as 23-year-old Tanya McKinley. A few streets away, they found her shoes and a purse containing her ID. Medical experts took over the body while investigators examined the crime scene. It was quickly established that Tanya was likely killed elsewhere, as there was no blood near her body except for the towel stains. Traces on the ground indicated the body had been dragged from the road to the roadside. Police found several human hairs, pubic hairs, and dog fur on the towel and Tanya's body, which they assumed belonged to the killer, possibly someone with a dog. Medical experts determined that Tanya had suffered a blow to the head with a heavy object. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation, and it was confirmed that the victim had been sexually assaulted. Experts collected a semen sample from her body, but DNA analysis was not widely used in forensics at that time. They could only establish that the suspect had type B blood. Since these clues didn't lead detectives to the killer, they began compiling a list of potential suspects. Their focus initially shifted to Tim, the victim's ex-boyfriend. Speaking with Tanya's relatives and friends, The police learned about the issues in their relationship and the constant arguments both before and after the birth of their son. When Tanya decided to end the relationship, Tim was against it. He didn't want to part ways with Tanya and continued trying to persuade her. Tim consistently called Tanya, visited her, and behaved as if he couldn't accept the breakup. Investigators considered that on New Year's Eve, Tim might have followed Tanya to the bar, leading to a confrontation that ended in murder. They brought him in for questioning, but he denied any involvement. Tim also agreed to provide hair samples. Although experts couldn't extract DNA from them, they were able to compare the hairs under a microscope, which would have been sufficient to establish similarity. However, Tim's hair significantly differed from those found on the victim's body and the towel, so he was temporarily ruled out as a suspect. After that, detectives turned their attention to everyone who was present at the bar on New Year's Eve. They questioned Vanita about any individuals who might have behaved strangely or aggressively towards Tanya, but she insisted that the evening had passed without any incidents and proceeded very well. The police also discovered that after breaking up with her boyfriend, Tanya briefly dated a man named Kurt, who happened to be the bartender at the same bar where she celebrated the new year and was on shift that night. They spoke with Kurt, but he claimed no involvement in the murder. According to him, after finishing his shift, he went to a New Year's party with friends. Investigators interviewed his friends, leading to an intriguing discovery. They confirmed Kurt's presence at the party but said that he didn't arrive immediately after ending his shift at the bar. Gathering all the testimonies, police concluded that theoretically, Kurt had enough time to commit the crime. Through multiple interviews with individuals from the bar, detectives determined that Tanya was last seen alive at 1:15 a.m. However, no one witnessed her leaving the bar. The police also interviewed residents in the area where the body was found. One family recalled driving by that spot around 2 a.m. and stated they were certain there was no body. Investigators established that Tanya was killed within a little over an hour and a half from the last time she was seen alive, and Kurt didn't have a solid alibi during this specific time frame. He agreed to a polygraph test, and the results were inconclusive, showing deceptive answers to some questions. However, lab experts determined that Kurt's blood type did not match the blood type of the killer as identified from the semen sample, so he was eliminated from the list of suspects. Police continued their search for other potential suspects, but their efforts led to dead ends. The analysis of the killer's semen wasn't possible, and they lacked any substantial evidence or witnesses, quickly hitting a dead end in this case. The only thing investigators were nearly certain of was that the perpetrator must have lived in the area where the body was found. This location was secluded from main roads, situated at the edge of an extensive residential area. Police doubted that an unfamiliar perpetrator would go there with the victim's body in a car without any knowledge of the area. Since then, the case remained unsolved for many years. Timothy, who was only 18 months old when his mother died, was raised by his father and Tanya's family. They all decided to shield the child from the truth about what happened to his mother. As he grew older, relatives told him that Tanya had died in a car accident. This continued until he turned 14. With Christmas approaching, the boy grew curious about the gift his father had prepared for him. Timothy decided to search through his father's closet, only to stumble upon something far more chilling than a mere present. He found a letter written by his father addressed to the popular TV host Montel Williams. In the letter, the man asked him to mention the unsolved murder of Tanya, hoping that the publicity would help move the case forward. The letter contained detailed accounts of the murder, and that's how Timothy learned the true fate of his mother. In the early 2000s, the local police department reopened Tanya's case, hoping advancements in DNA analysis would help identify the killer. They sent all available evidence to the laboratory. Upon examination, experts concluded that the blood on the blue towel found near the body did not belong to Tanya but to an unknown man. They obtained his DNA profile and uploaded it to the FBI database, but there were no matches. The case went cold again until it was reopened in 2015, exactly 30 years after the murder. The killer's DNA still hadn't appeared in the FBI database, prompting detectives to try a different approach. Modern tools allowed them to search not only for exact matches but also for partial ones. They considered the possibility that the database might contain relatives of the killer, which could lead them to the suspect. In 2018, journalist Tony Adams took an interest in the case. Despite not specializing in crime, his personal interest in the subject drew him to the unsolved murder of Tanya. He worked to garner media coverage for the case, bringing additional attention to it, and offered a fresh perspective to an investigation that had lingered for over 3 decades. A year later, in 2019, detectives decided to make another attempt to find the killer's relatives. This time, they sought assistance from Parabon, a company specializing in genetic genealogy. In their previous attempt, investigators had only looked for potential relatives through the FBI database, which contained samples from various criminals. Parabon, however, examined public genetic databases, which were significantly broader in scope. Anyone could upload their DNA sample to these databases for purposes such as finding relatives or exploring their ancestry. Experts diligently worked through potential relatives of the killer, methodically examining their family trees to identify someone fitting the criteria of their suspect. They sought a man who, in 1985, was old enough to commit the crime and lived in the area. This process took almost a year and presented an incredibly challenging task for the experts. In February 2020, they finally identified a man who theoretically could be the killer. It was 57-year-old Daniel Wells, who lived in the same city at the time of the murder. Detectives delved into his background and found that Wells had come to the attention of the police several times in the late 80s. He was arrested for assault and later for indecent exposure. As of 2020, Daniel continued to live in Pensacola, working as a carpenter with a wife and children. Detectives needed a sample of his DNA for a direct comparison with the killer's profile to establish his potential connection to the murder. Due to the absence of any solid evidence, police proceeded cautiously with Daniel, fearing he might flee once he realized he had been identified. They put him under surveillance and soon got an opportunity to obtain his DNA. Daniel threw a cigarette butt out of his car window near his workplace. Investigators seized it and immediately sent it to the lab. Experts extracted DNA from the saliva on the filter and compared it with the killer's DNA from Tanya's case. The results showed a perfect match. 35 years later, the police finally identified the perpetrator, and on the same day he was arrested. Investigators wanted to obtain a confession from Daniel, so they proceeded cautiously and refrained from revealing all their evidence at once. They asked patrol officers to pull over Daniel's car under the pretext of a standard ID check. Detectives then approached Daniel and told him he needed to go to the station with them, deliberately withholding additional information to keep him in suspense. During questioning, investigators slowly directed the conversation towards Tanya's murder, asking about Daniel's whereabouts that night. Initially, he denied ever knowing the woman. That's when detectives revealed that his DNA was found at the crime scene. Daniel continued to deny everything but grew increasingly nervous with each question. Detectives emphasized the undeniable nature of the DNA results, leaving him no chance of avoiding consequences. They made it clear that the only way to ease his situation was to confess, and it worked. At some point, Daniel began to speak. Initially, he tried to justify the presence of his DNA by suggesting that he might have had sex with Tanya that night. Detectives didn't believe this version and continued to demand the truth. Eventually, Daniel confessed to killing Tanya on that New Year's Eve. However, his story raised serious questions. He admitted to being at the bar where he met Tanya, who mentioned she was looking for a ride home. Daniel offered to help. According to his story, they went to his house, where they drank and engaged in consensual intimate intercourse. But then an argument erupted between them, and Daniel claimed he couldn't remember the cause. The situation escalated to the point where Daniel, in a fit of rage, grabbed a heavy wooden cutting board and struck Tanya on the head. Realizing she had died, he panicked. Daniel took her body to the location where it would later be discovered and left it there. On his way back, he disposed of her belongings and returned home. When asked about the dog hairs found on the victim's clothes and towel, he explained that his roommate had a black Labrador, and those hairs were indeed black. Daniel's story sounded like an attempt to minimize his own responsibility. It was hard to believe that Tanya willingly engaged in consensual sex with him, only to have such a severe argument minutes later that led to her death. He also claimed that she died after the blow to the head. However, medical experts had undeniable evidence that the cause of death was strangulation. A more plausible scenario would be that Daniel attempted to assault Tanya, and she resisted. He then struck her on the head but quickly realized she was still alive, leading him to strangle her. Despite the fact that the suspect's confession probably didn't align with the actual events, detectives had everything they needed. Daniel was arrested on charges of murder and placed in custody. Right after that, investigators contacted Tanya's relatives, including her son, to deliver the long-awaited news. Timothy couldn't hold back his tears and thanked the police for finally finding his mother's killer. However, Daniel wasn't destined to face a judge and serve time for his actions. Just 2 weeks after his arrest, his lifeless body was discovered in his cell. The examination indicated that he had taken his own life. Tanya's relatives were disappointed that the murderer had escaped the prospect of spending decades behind bars. Nevertheless, they found some closure in knowing that after 35 long years, the case was finally solved. Tanya's case is a testament to the resilience of her family, the determination of law enforcement, and the power of modern science, and highlights the importance of forensic genealogy in bringing justice to cold cases. It's a reminder that even decades later, the truth can still come to light. As always, I want to take a moment to share some of my safety tips inspired by Tanya's case. Always stay aware of your surroundings and have a plan to get home safely, and avoid isolated areas if possible. Trust your instincts. If something or someone makes you feel uncomfortable, don't hesitate to leave or seek help. When going out, always stick together and never leave a friend behind, especially if they've been drinking. Look out for each other to ensure everyone gets home safely. And share your location with your trusted friends or family. Let someone you trust know your plans and location, especially if you're out late. Consider using safety apps for added security. I share my favorite safety app with the link in the description. I use it for my own family, and the best part is that its free plan is all you need. Thank you for joining me today on Chilling Fireside Stories. Please like, subscribe, and share to help keep these stories alive. Until my next story, stay warm and stay informed and stay safe.